best practices. I'm going to share some of mine, then I'm going to have Keith share some of his as well. But when it comes to that, again, in the beginning, you have a virtual meeting. Throughout the sales process, try to use as much meetingless interaction as possible, and then the virtual meeting toward the end when it comes to the final close or commit. So when it comes to virtual meeting, I always say first meeting, some people call it discovery call, executive overview, whatever it is that you call it. When it comes to that introduction, you want to go to that first meeting and record it. You want to record it because you can always reference back to it. I always ask the folks, online, is it okay if I record? And you can send it off to people who maybe could not have made that call. I say use virtual meeting also for information gathering, needs analysis. Some people do this in the first call. Some people have a subsequent meeting to do this. I think it's important to have that. And I also think it's important for the first demo. So if you notice the theme here for virtual meetings, anytime there's a first of a stage is important to do that virtual meeting. And whoever can make it, but when it comes to the subsequent meetings, whether it's gathering information or demos, proposals, and negotiations, this is where you don't necessarily need to have those meetings over and over. And believe me, your buyers will appreciate this. Your prospects will say, oh my gosh, I'm so glad we didn't have to meet over having to ask me 3 questions, for putting together your proposal. So, and this is where you can use that meetingless interaction using tools that will be able to engage everybody that's involved in that process. And then when it comes to the commitment piece or closing, that's where you can continue that relationship building, where you can either at some point, maybe you can go on site. So really when it comes to remote selling in this sense, my recommendation is to use a combination of everything, but absolutely include meetingless interaction when it comes to that process. I'm going to hand it off to Keith for some more best practices.
All right, so when it comes to virtual meetings, making technology easy for clients is something that's important. There's so many different types of platforms out there. There's GoToMeetings, there's Microsoft Meetings, there's Zoom. And so you may think that it's easy for a client to figure out what tool or how to basically use the technology. That's not always the case. I ended up doing a presentation last week on Microsoft Teams and never had used Microsoft Teams. And while I know there's some similarities, I was at a really big disadvantage. So keep that in mind. Keep technology easy for your clients. And there are tons of virtual tools. So those virtual tools can enhance the presentation. I don't know if anybody's noticed the dot that's been at the bottom. Well, Jeremy can use that to point to different areas or different things that he wants you to focus on. There are highlight tools, there are arrows, there are a ton of tools that you can do things with when you're walking through, whether you're doing a needs analysis. You can pull up a whiteboard where you can diagram something out. And then the other thing is, if you use technology long enough, there are going to be some challenges or some issues at some point in time, whether it be bandwidth or whatever that is. Have a backup plan, even if it means just getting on cell phones and finishing up the call. That's a lot more effective than not having a backup plan. And every minute of planning saves literally 2 minutes. So when you do virtual, you have to spend a little bit more time with kind of the pre-call planning of, the questions that you're going to ask. And, I would suggest maybe even making a checklist. And salespeople oftentimes don't like to plan thoroughly. They think they know the client, especially when they have a relationship, but that's not always the case. And as a part of that planning process, it really helps you build rapport with your client. And so obviously most people will do LinkedIn, Google searches, and those type of things. Take it one step further. Think about the connections that you might have with that person that you're talking with. Somebody I do some consulting with, they're a master at this. They will look through somebody's LinkedIn, and while I've looked at their schooling background and those type of things, they've figured out how to engage that person. We were on a call a couple of weeks ago with a client, and the guy that I'm working with, he mentions this guy's name, and the client literally says, "Wow, that's a name I haven't heard in ages." And so before, and they started having this conversation. So that's one way you can use LinkedIn even more effectively. And then think about what their social style is. You may have gotten emails from them if you looked at their LinkedIn profile. they will give you some clues about social styles, which will give you some insight into how should I communicate with them most effectively. Do they need a lot of content? Do they want it, you know, short, brief, and to the point? Do they like to ramble on? Are they the life of the party? Pay attention to their facial cues, because that will give you some insight into how well is your call going. Things going well, or are they not going? And oftentimes they'll call these micro expressions. So building a little skill around that will help you communicate and build rapport a lot more effectively. And then when they talk, how do they talk? Do they talk fast? Do they talk slow? How's their pitch? How's their vocal variety? And then what do you see? You know, look at now, if you look at Jeremy's background, he's not really giving you a lot of information because of the white ball. And if you look I'm not giving you much information either. Now, I've moved recently, so the walls are blank. So there, at some point, there might be some stuff up there, but I've got a background also, so that doesn't always tell you everything. But if you pay attention, you'll find some patterns of behavior, and doing those things will help you communicate more effectively. And, you know, this part about the meetingless interaction, the meetingless interaction is not a one interaction. You have to think in terms of the interaction of all of the pieces. So the virtual meeting and the meetingless interaction, how do all those pieces fall together? I really recommend that you process map the communication process and what that's going to actually look like for all the different meetings that you may have. What tools are you going to use? Some of those tools, as Jeremy said earlier, may be video. They may be, you know, documents and things that are loaded in. What documents are going to be the most effective for what person? So you can think in terms of the social style and think of, this person needs a lot of detail. Maybe the video will be more important for them. Maybe somebody that's their social style, their driver, their bottom line person, maybe giving them a piece of paper that has bullet points will be more effective for them. So think through that. And then the scripting piece really refers more to, if you're going to do a video, script that video, because with all these different tools, it'll make a big difference. Now, you may have to do the video several times and listen to it and pay attention to it, but I can tell you, even working with the virtual assistant, recently I did a video and it was specific about some things I wanted them to do, and they sent me a note that said thank you. So the power of using a video and scripting it out and really thinking about how you want to communicate your proposal can be the difference between getting a deal and not getting a deal. And then the social intelligence piece is just looking at the overall picture to say, you know, how do we communicate with this group, and thinking through the empathy and COVID and all of those things, and the parameters and the circumstances that people are in. And those are all things that will make these virtual meetings be a lot more effective than they have been, you know, in the past.
Yeah, no, I think I totally agree. And it's interesting. Our friend Joe here has another interesting comment and question. What do you think of getting around Zoom virtual fatigue? I think this is a really good point. I've been seeing more and more of this where we're in, I mean, especially now that school started, and if you have kids and they're on Zooms all day, how do you, and I'll give my answer as well, Keith, but what are you doing right now to sort of alleviate that pain, that Zoom fatigue, that not only as a seller, but the audience, right? The people who you're inviting to these meetings, they've been on Zoom calls, back-to-back Zoom calls all day as well. How do you approach that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the planning process. You know, like a lot of meetings, it's just like people have meeting fatigue in general. You know, you're meeting all day, and then the last hour of the day, you try to get all your work done, or you go home and you got a ton of work.
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to have a virtual meeting, have an agenda.
Yeah.
Have people have a reason to be there, get to the point, get in, get out. We oftentimes like to schedule our meetings for 50 minutes. And the reason the 50 minutes, it gives people 10 additional minutes. So that way, if you finish before the hour, because more than likely they've got another meeting that's going to come up. So that gives them an opportunity to take a break, go to the bathroom, check email or whatever that is. I think you can do the same thing with Zoom.
Yeah,
if you have a 30-minute interaction, make it 25. That gives people 5 additional minutes. So I think between that and effective planning makes a big difference and helps people out.
Yeah, and I'm cognizant of that as well. Joe actually had a meeting yesterday that I scheduled a week ago, and as we were going back and forth on scheduling that meeting, I gave her the option. I said, let's meet at 2:30. I can call you on your cell if you want, just give me your cell phone, or I'll send you a Zoom link. And she actually chose a Zoom link. She says, let's do a Zoom call. So I think by giving them the option would be helpful as well.
And then this piece here around increasing team knowledge, a lot of organizations have been adverse to embracing remote and on-demand training. People don't really have you don't have any choice now. So a lot of teams are not doing as much formal training. Some companies are hesitant to even do virtual training, but formal training is something that's still important during these times. I think training around remote selling is important. We make an assumption that people know how to do this because they've been doing it already, but there's kind of that knowing doing gap. There's a big difference between what people know and what people actually do. And when we work with people, there are always opportunities for them to be more effective. Informal training is also effective. That happens on a regular basis. People are always online looking up stuff. And then I think having a knowledge sharing strategy is something that's really important and can make all the difference in the world. When I was a district sales manager, we would have a weekly call, and that call was only 15 minutes, but it was just to kind of level set the week, find out what went well the previous week, and talk about the strategy that was coming up for the week and what was going to work. Doing brainstorming sessions, I think, especially during this time, I find the companies that have been very successful are those that have been able to pivot. And some of that pivoting is just brainstorming as a team about what works, what doesn't work, and some of the challenges and issues that you're having. And then really think through doing some war gaming. Put yourself in the shoes of your competitor. Your competitor has a value proposition. So I suggest that if you haven't done a pest or a SWOT analysis since COVID, I would recommend that you highly do that. So most people will do a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. A pest is helpful also because PEST will basically point out the political, economic, social, and technological pieces, and that oftentimes will inform your SWOT. I've seen oftentimes when we go through business planning process and you look at the SWOT, everybody's got exactly the same SWOT. Well, if you do a PEST, your SWOTs will be a lot more effective and will help you really figure out some of the critical success factors that you need to drive business. And I think that's one of the really winning strategies to kind of war game through, and it will help you pivot during this time. And those efforts along for remote selling will, I think that'll do you really good.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. When it comes to training, what I found is that at least during the real peak of the pandemic, I saw a lot of teams utilizing that time to train their people. So we're starting to see more of that, and I think people are starting to realize how important that is to stay ahead of the curve, and it's really helpful for recovery.